What do NBA agents, MLS negotiators, and fight promoters have in common this month? They're all studying Shedeur Sanders' contract. The clause that just shook the NFL wasn't born from court battles or collective bargaining. It came quietly through standard contract law. The prime equity clause is a simple but devastatingly effective tool. It reserves image and likeness rights to the athlete, not the league, and it's already generating ripple effects beyond football.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Sanders made $14 million from his digital empire before the Browns even gave him a number. Now every league is watching, and some are already moving. That cross-sport curiosity isn't speculative, it's structural. Sanders' success exposes how much of modern sports economics depends on athlete suppression. With Deion Sanders as both mentor and architect, this deal didn't just break precedent, it revealed how fragile the old model really is. Players now have a replicable playbook for autonomy. Teams face a decision: cling to control or adapt to shared sovereignty. One clause created a shift, and the industry can't unsee it. The NFL just got hit with something it wasn't prepared for. And this time, it didn't come from a franchise's defense, an explosive offense, or a scandal in the headlines. It came from a contract, quietly signed, perfectly structured, and fundamentally game-changing. Shedeur Sanders didn't just sign a rookie deal with the Cleveland Browns. He architected a new model of athlete empowerment, one that cuts through the bureaucracy, slices around the collective bargaining agreement, and forces the league to confront a new reality. Players are no longer products. They're platforms. Let's talk about what really happened here. Before playing a single regular season snap, Shedeur generated over $14 million. That wasn't from a signing bonus. It didn't come from performance incentives. It wasn't even attached to a league-approved sponsorship. It came entirely from his own brand, an ecosystem he built, scaled, and monetized while still playing college ball at Colorado. This wasn't accidental. It was engineered. He used nil reforms to lay the groundwork, assembled a vertically integrated digital business, then carried it directly into the NFL. He showed up with a fully operational audience, monetized content streams, e-commerce infrastructure, and a loyal consumer base that wasn't just following his stats. They were buying into his identity. And then came the clause. The prime equity clause is simple in design, seismic in effect. It gives Shedeur full ownership of his name, image, and likeness. Not shared ownership. Not league-licensed access. Full control. And not just symbolically, functionally. That means a guaranteed 20% share of every single dollar generated by his brand. That includes jersey sales, social media content, merchandise, highlight reels, sponsorships, and anything tied to his identity. And this revenue stream? It operates entirely outside the NFL's collective bargaining agreement. No revenue sharing. No league sign-off. No approval needed. It bypasses the standard commercial bottlenecks and creates a new pathway, one that players own and institutions can no longer monopolize. This clause is not symbolic. It's not experimental. It's legal infrastructure. It's the kind of precision you get when you stop thinking like a prospect and start negotiating like a company. And that's what Sanders is, a company. This deal isn't about pushing boundaries. It's about replacing them. Because Shedeur didn't just challenge the league's commercial model, he proved that it's vulnerable. That its centralized, top-down control of branding and monetization is no longer inevitable. That players can walk in, opt out of institutional control, and still walk away with millions. He made the business side of sports work for him, without litigation, without protest, and without making enemies. He played the game the league built and beat it at its own rules. The Browns, to their credit, didn't resist. They saw the future and said yes. They didn't treat him like a prospect to mold. They treated him like an enterprise worth investing in. And they were right. His jersey sales in the first month outpaced established veterans. But the real twist? His 20% cut of those proceeds brought in more than his entire rookie salary. That's not a headline stat. That's a structural reality the league can no longer ignore. And the reason that matters is because it completely detaches athlete value from the field. For decades, the NFL has assigned value based on production. Touchdowns, tackles, championships. But Shedeur flipped that equation. He showed that a player's worth can come from off-field visibility. From audience reach, brand engagement, and content output. From being commercially self-sustaining. That $14 million isn't just income, it's proof. Proof that traditional player valuation metrics are outdated. That modern athlete assessments need to account for engagement ratios, content velocity, conversion rates. This is the first time scouts might need to consider Shopify dashboards alongside game film. That's not exaggeration. That's evolution. And it's already happening. Agents are rewriting contract playbooks. Veteran players are going back through their deals, looking for buried language they never understood. The phrase image rights used to be brushed over during rushed draft day negotiations. Not anymore. Because players are realizing they didn't lack leverage, they lacked awareness. The prime equity clause didn't create leverage. It clarified it. It gave players the vocabulary to articulate ownership and the structure to enforce it. And this structure? It's portable. It's not based on Shedeur's fame or his father's legacy. It's built on existing legal precedent. Contract law that allows individuals to retain unilateral rights unless explicitly transferred. That means any athlete with a monetized platform and competent legal support can replicate it. That's what makes this dangerous for the institutions that have relied on uniformity. Because once one league accepts a player-driven monetization model, the rest are exposed. Any attempt to suppress or reject this structure will eventually face antitrust scrutiny. If the NFL clings to centralized control while other leagues modernize, it becomes a target. And when the legal landscape changes, all it takes is one class action challenge to blow the gates open. It's not just the NFL watching now. It's the NBA, the MLS, combat sports promoters. Everyone's watching how the league responds because this isn't just about one deal. It's about whether institutional control can survive in a post-digital economy. Shedeur proved that it doesn't have to. His clause treats the athlete as a sovereign brand. The team becomes a distribution partner. And the league? A service provider whose value must now be justified, not assumed. This changes every dynamic. Players are now able to monetize themselves independently. Their highlights aren't league assets, they're personal IP. If they're wearing the jersey but the camera's on them and the content is posted to their page and the audience is theirs, why should the league get a cut? The clause answers that it shouldn't. That's why the league's panic isn't about revenue, it's about relevance. For years, the NFL was the central filter through which everything flowed. The players didn't own their footage, their moments, their stories. Now, players do. That's not a financial change. That's an ontological shift. One that redefines what it means to participate in a professional league. This isn't some isolated outlier. This is how systems collapse. Not with a bang but with a contract. The prime equity clause is the new standard for athletes who know how to build before they sign. Who bring value to the table and refuse to leave without keeping a share of it. And it's going to spread. Teams that resist it will lose talent. Teams that adopt it will win the future. And the league? It has two choices. Adapt or become a dinosaur in an era of player-driven ecosystems. So what side do you think they'll take? Should athletes fight for these terms? Should this clause become the baseline for every contract? Drop your take in the comments. Like the video if you believe athletes should own their likeness. Share it with someone who still thinks league control is permanent. And make sure you're subscribed. We're covering every contract that changes the game. Because this isn't just a payday. It's a playbook. And Shedeur Sanders just wrote the first chapter. The prime equity clause wasn't just about Shedeur Sanders getting paid. It was about Shedeur Sanders getting free. And now that it's happened, now that a rookie quarterback, before taking a single professional snap, secured over $14 million on his own terms, the rest of the league is forced to confront a truth they've spent decades avoiding. The players were always the product. They just didn't know they could own it. Shedeur knew. Or maybe more accurately, Deion Sanders knew, and passed down the blueprint. Because this wasn't just a personal win. This was generational architecture. Deion has spent years talking about athlete exploitation, about image rights, about legacy. But instead of getting loud, they got smart, legal, strategic, and they built something sustainable. The prime equity clause is more than a contract provision. It's a manifesto in legal form. A declaration that says, you don't get to commodify me unless I say so. And if you want in, you pay me directly. That's not a negotiation. That's control. For the NFL, that control is a problem. Because the league's model wasn't just built around talent. It was built around containment. Every piece of the player experience was designed to fold into the league's brand. You were drafted, packaged, promoted, sold, and every bit of value you created was funneled upward. Until now. Now there's a clause that breaks the funnel. It opens a parallel pipeline, one where revenue generated through content, merch, and influence doesn't touch the league's books. And because it operates outside the CBA, It doesn't need league approval to function. That's what makes it bulletproof. It's also what makes it scalable. The clause doesn't rely on collective bargaining or league goodwill or union strength. It relies on contract law. A player keeps their rights unless they sign them away. That's it. Simple. Undeniable. And incredibly powerful. And because Shedeur didn't sign those rights away, he owns all of it. The Instagram clips. The viral reels. The highlight montages. The jerseys. The fan edits. The merch drops. And every time any of those things earn money, he takes a guaranteed 20%. No approval. No waiting period. No cuts going to the team or league before him. It's his. And that's why the $14 million he's already earned isn't just income. It's validation. A number the league can't explain away. A figure that exposes just how much revenue has historically not gone to players. Because let's be honest, the old model was built to obscure this kind of earning potential. Players got performance bonuses, signing incentives, and endorsements, but the league kept control over the stuff that scaled. The merch, the media, the name. Shedeur's contract ripped that veil off. It showed that if a player enters the league with infrastructure, an audience, monetized platforms, and a functioning brand, they don't need the NFL to create value. They just need it to distribute. And that reframes everything. The athlete is now the brand. The team is now the distributor. And the league is now a service provider whose job is to amplify, not extract. That inversion is exactly what institutions like the NFL have worked to avoid. Because if enough players operate like Shedeur, the league loses its monopoly on the narrative. Control over highlight footage? Gone. Exclusive jersey profit channels? Gone. The ability to dictate when and how a player can profit from their identity? Gone. And it's not just NFL players taking notes. Agents across the NBA, MLS, and even Olympic circles are already rewriting contracts to follow this model. Because once it's clear that an athlete can bring commercial power with them, and protect it legally, no one wants to go back. The teams that get it? They're adapting fast. The Browns knew what they were doing. They didn't just say yes to a quarterback. They said yes to a new model of athlete. One who doesn't wait for brand value to be assigned, but enters with it already in hand. And it's a smart bet. Because if Shedeur lives up to the hype on the field, great. If not, he still brings value. His brand scales independent of performance. That means less risk, less volatility, more upside. Compare that to the old way of doing things, where you pray your first-round pick doesn't flop, and if he does, you're left with nothing but cap space regret. With this model, even if the stats fall short, the brand still drives engagement, still sells jerseys, still pulls in eyes. That's the new calculus. And you can bet franchises are now asking their scouting departments to pull up TikTok engagement stats alongside 40-yard dash times. Because if the next rookie doesn't just throw touchdowns but also brings 1 million subscribers and a thriving merch line, that's value you can't measure in yards. Scouting reports are turning into media kits. Endorsements are turning into ownership. And the athlete as brand model is becoming not just common, but required. Shedeur isn't the exception. He's the prototype. And that terrifies traditionalists who still believe the league is the star. Because if enough athletes start entering the system with this kind of independence, the center of gravity shifts permanently. The league doesn't own the moment anymore. The players do. What makes this even harder to fight is the way it happened. Not through headlines. Not through drama. It wasn't a boycott or a courtroom battle. It was just smart paperwork. Handled quietly. Filed legally. Activated without conflict. And that's the most dangerous kind of revolution, the kind that doesn't make noise until it's already done. Veteran players are already reacting. Not with anger but with regret. Regret that no one told them they could have asked for more. That their identity had value beyond game film. That their presence, on and off the field, was worth more than what was printed in their contracts. But the next generation won't have that regret. Because now they've seen the proof. They know that commercial autonomy isn't a dream, it's a clause. One that can be built, protected, and enforced. All it takes is preparation, a following, and the refusal to sign away what you've already built. This changes the entire ecosystem. Brands looking to partner with players will no longer go through the league. They'll go directly to the athletes. Licensing deals will have to be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. Teams that want stars will have to offer more than a depth chart. They'll need to offer autonomy. And fans? They'll be buying into the player, not just the jersey. That's what's happening here. The fan economy is shifting. Instead of teams being the gatekeepers to athlete access, the players are becoming the gateway. Content, engagement, identity, it all lives at the player level now, not the league level. And that makes the league nervous, because for the first time, its relevance is conditional. So what's the NFL going to do? Will it resist this shift, or restructure itself around it? Will it try to reassert control, or adapt to the reality that players are no longer interchangeable parts, but independently valuable entities? It doesn't have much time to decide, because what started with one clause in one contract is already spreading. This is not a glitch in the system. It is the new system. Here's what's wild. The NFL saw this coming. Not the exact clause, not the name prime equity, but the threat. The creeping realization that at some point the players wouldn't just want more, they'd take more. Not by walking out. Not by suing. But by walking in prepared and saying, this is how it's going to work now. And now that Shedeur Sanders has done it, the league can't unsee it. They can't shrug it off as a PR stunt. They can't paint it as a gamble. The money's real. The structure is replicable. The impact? Immediate. Over $14 million earned without touching the field, secured outside of league licensing and away from the collective bargaining agreement. That's not a footnote in a flashy rookie deal. That's a direct hit to the heart of the NFL's financial model. Because here's what's really broken: the illusion of league supremacy. For years, the NFL built a business model on centralized control of image rights, merchandising, branding, content distribution. It wasn't just about football. It was about owning football. Every player, every name, every highlight reel was processed through league systems, monetized through official partnerships, and controlled under league-first licensing. Shedeur's clause shattered that model. By retaining full control of his name, image, and likeness, and getting a guaranteed 20% cut of everything tied to it, he essentially carved out a separate economy that the NFL doesn't touch. It's not subject to team revenue-sharing rules. It doesn't run through league-managed media rights. And it can't be blocked, capped, or controlled by the Shield. For a league built on the premise that it is the star, this is an identity crisis. Because Shedeur Sanders didn't just show up to play. He showed up as an entity. A functioning, scaled, revenue-generating business. The Browns didn't just draft a quarterback, they onboarded a brand. And instead of controlling that brand, they partnered with it. That's the shift. And it's a shift the entire sports world is now scrambling to understand. The NBA, which has long leaned into player branding, now has agents looking at nil clauses more seriously than ever. MLS, a league desperate for relevance among younger demographics, sees this as a potential recruitment edge. Combat sports? They've been waiting for this kind of language to give fighters the same leverage athletes in team sports are starting to claim. Because what this clause really does is make things clear. For too long, players gave up rights they didn't know they were giving up. Image rights buried in legalese. Merch cuts masked behind generic revenue pools. Content control turned into blanket waivers signed before draft day. The prime equity clause makes it simple. I own me. And that simplicity is devastating to the old guard. Veteran NFL players, some with Hall of Fame resumes, are now looking at Shedeur's deal like it's an encrypted message they were never given the key to. Not because they weren't valuable, but because they were never told value was negotiable. They played by the rules, signed what was put in front of them, and were told to be grateful. Now they're watching a rookie make more money off his jersey than his actual rookie contract. And they're not bitter. They're recalibrated. They're calling their agents. Reviewing contract language. Reassessing long-term licensing deals that they never really understood. The clause didn't just open a door, it turned on the lights. Now everyone's seeing what they gave away. And it's not just the players. Teams are paying attention too. Because the Browns didn't just break with tradition. They won a competitive advantage. They became the first franchise to say, we'll take the complexity if it means we get the talent that comes with it. They accepted custom royalty systems, individualized IP protection, and a brand they can't fully control, because they knew the trade-off was worth it. This is how smart teams win. Not just on the field but in the front office. Because in a free agent market that's more competitive than ever, autonomy sells. And if a player can get that from one team, they're not going to settle for less somewhere else. So the franchises that stay rigid, that try to pretend nothing's changed, they're going to lose out. Because this generation of athletes doesn't just want money. They want ownership. They want control over their content, their audience, their revenue. They've seen what creators, influencers, and independent artists have done. They know that the infrastructure exists to build outside the system. Shedeur Sanders brought that infrastructure with him. YouTube, Instagram, e-commerce. A fan base ready to buy him, not just his jersey. He didn't need the league to give him a platform. He just needed the league to honor the one he already built. And that's what the prime equity clause forces: recognition. It forces the NFL, and every league watching, to admit that the player is not just a participant. He's a partner. And if you want access to his image, his content, and his cultural capital, you need to negotiate for it. That's what makes this a cultural inflection point. Not just a financial breakthrough, but a philosophical one. Because we're not just talking about sports anymore. We're talking about labor, about capital, about the distribution of value in a system that has long expected creators to accept being cogs. Just like musicians used to need record labels and now don't. Just like filmmakers used to need studios and now don't. Athletes, for the first time, are realizing they don't need leagues to monetize their existence. Not if they've already built the audience and the infrastructure. And the most poetic part? This didn't require revolution. It didn't require protest. It didn't even require conflict. It required legal literacy. It required planning. And it required the audacity to say no to the default setting. Shedeur Sanders didn't walk in with demands. He walked in with a business. And now, the business model of the entire league is under pressure. So here's the real question. How long until the clause becomes the norm? How long until every top prospect comes to the table with followers, merch, brand deals, and legal terms that say, "I'll sign with you, but not at the cost of myself"? Because once this becomes standardized, the league can't hide behind tradition anymore. It will have to compete for talent, not just with money but with freedom. And if it doesn't? Other leagues, new platforms, or even alternative sports ecosystems will be waiting with open arms and open contracts. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Should every rookie come into the league with their own prime equity clause? Are we seeing the end of centralized control in pro sports? Or just the beginning? Hit like if you think athletes deserve to own what they build. Share this with someone still defending the old system. And subscribe, because this is only the first wave. The future of sports labor isn't arriving. It's already here. And the game just changed. Permanently.